The radio studio was small, quiet, and old. Not old in a broken way, but old in a way that felt heavy with memories. The walls had seen many people come and go. Some had spoken with confidence, some had whispered with fear, some had laughed loudly, while others had struggled to finish a single sentence. The studio remembered all of it. On this day, the lights were softer than usual. The air felt different, almost careful. There was no live audience, no flashing cameras, only microphones, headphones, and a red light waiting to turn on. This was not a normal interview. The people sitting inside the studio were known by many outside. They were seen as successful, strong, confident. But inside this room, they were just humans again. No costumes, no scripts, no applause. The radio host adjusted the mic slowly. The host had done interviews for years, but today felt strange. Not exciting, not scary, just deep, like something important was about to surface. When the red light turned on, the room went silent. For a few seconds, no one spoke. The host finally broke the silence with a calm voice. The voice was gentle, almost respectful. It welcomed the listeners, but it did not sound like a show. It sounded like a conversation meant for late-night listeners who were alone, tired, or thinking too much. The host said this interview was rare, not because of fame, but because honesty was hard to find. The microphones captured every breath. At first, the questions were simple. How did the project begin? What was the first idea? What did the early days feel like? The answers came slowly. One voice spoke about excitement, about hope, about believing something special could be made. But even that voice carried doubt under the words. Another voice followed, softer. It talked about pressure, about expectations, about how the world outside already wanted results before the work even started. No one interrupted, no one rushed. The radio studio felt like it was listening. As the conversation moved forward, the tone changed. The host asked about the beginning days, the days no one saw, the days before attention, before praise, before success. A pause followed. One of them cleared their throat, then spoke. They said the beginning was messy, very messy. Nothing was clear. Plans changed every day. Some mornings began with hope and ended with confusion. Some nights ended with silence, where no one knew what to say anymore. They admitted something quietly. They said there were days when quitting felt easier than continuing. That sentence hung in the air. Another voice joined in. This one sounded stronger, but tired. It talked about responsibility, about carrying not just personal dreams, but the dreams of many others. Crew members, support staff, families waiting at home. They said when things went wrong, it did not feel like failure. It felt like letting people down. The host did not interrupt. The silence between sentences felt just as important as the words. The studio lights hummed softly. As the interview continued, the host asked about fear. Not the fear people show, but the fear people hide. The answer came without hesitation. Fear was always present. Fear of not being good enough. Fear of being judged. Fear of wasting time and energy. Fear that all the effort might lead nowhere. One voice admitted they could not sleep properly for months. Not because of work hours, but because of thoughts. The mind never rested. Even when the body was tired, the thoughts stayed awake. Another voice shared how confidence was slowly replaced by self-doubt. Each small mistake felt bigger than it was. Each delay felt like a personal failure. The listeners could imagine it clearly, not as famous people, but as workers trying their best and still feeling unsure. The host then asked a simple but heavy question. What kept you going? The room went quiet again. Someone laughed softly. Not a happy laugh, a nervous one. They said sometimes nothing kept them going. Sometimes they moved forward only because stopping felt worse. Another person said it was trust. Trust that the pain would mean something later. Trust that effort, even unseen, was not wasted. One voice spoke about teamwork. about moments when one person felt weak and another stepped in, about silent support, a nod, a look, a shared understanding that said, "We are in this together." The radio host listened closely. Then the host asked about the moments when belief was tested the most. The answer came with honesty. There were days when everything felt wrong. Scenes did not work. Ideas failed. Time slipped away faster than expected. Criticism came early, even before results. One person said they started questioning their own ability. They wondered if they were chosen by mistake, if someone else could have done better. Another voice added that success stories often hide these moments. People only see the final outcome, not the nights filled with doubt. The studio felt heavier now, but also more real. The host gently asked if anyone ever felt alone during this journey. The answer was immediate. Yes, even surrounded by people. Loneliness existed. Decisions felt personal. Mistakes felt personal. The responsibility felt personal. One speaker said they smiled in public, but inside they felt empty. They did not want to worry others, so they kept quiet. Silence became a habit. The host nodded, though no one could see it. The conversation slowly moved to expectations. Expectations from fans, from industry voices, from themselves. One voice explained how expectations can motivate, but they can also crush. When people expect greatness, every small step feels judged. Another voice said they stopped reading comments for a while, not because of hate, but because even praise added pressure. Praise came with expectations of being better, faster, stronger. The host asked if there was ever a moment when everything almost stopped. The studio froze. This time, the pause was longer. Finally, one person spoke. Their voice was low. They said yes. There was a moment when progress felt impossible. Too many problems came together. Money issues, time issues, creative disagreements. They said there was a meeting where no one spoke much. Everyone stared at the table. The silence felt louder than any argument. That day, they went home early. That night, they sat alone, thinking about effort already given, thinking about people depending on them, thinking about what quitting would mean. The voice broke slightly while sharing this. The host did not rush. Another person added that same night. They also sat awake, in a different place, with the same thoughts. They did not know others felt the same. The radio captured that truth gently. The host then asked about the role of mistakes. The answers were honest. Mistakes were everywhere. Big ones, small ones. Some were fixed, some left marks. But every mistake taught something. Not always immediately, but eventually. One voice said mistakes forced them to listen more, to slow down, to accept help. Another said mistakes humbled them. They stopped trying to prove something and started trying to build something. As the interview moved forward, the emotional weight shifted slightly. Not lighter, but deeper. The host asked about growth. How did this journey change them as humans, not as creators or performers? One voice said patience was learned the hard way. They used to want quick results. Now they understood timing mattered. Another voice said they learned to trust people more. Before they carried everything alone. Now they understood shared weight is lighter. Someone else said they learned that fear does not disappear. It only becomes familiar. And once familiar, it becomes manageable. The studio felt calm now. Not because the story was easy, but because it was honest. The host then asked a question that made everyone pause again. If this project had failed, what would you have taken with you? The answers were thoughtful. One said lessons. Another said friendships. Another said self-respect for trying. One voice said even failure would not erase the growth. The nights spent thinking. The mornings spent trying again. Those things would remain. The radio host thanked them quietly. As the red light stayed on, the host sensed the energy in the room shift. The conversation had gone deeper than expected. It was no longer about work. It was about life. Before moving forward, the host said something simple. This room has heard many voices, but today, it hears truth. The microphones stayed still. The studio felt full, not of sound, but of meaning. The host then said they would take a short pause before continuing. Not for ads, not for music, just a pause. The red light dimmed slightly. No one spoke, and in that silence, the listeners felt it too. Something important had been shared, but the story was not finished yet. The pause did not last long, but it felt deep. When the red light slowly turned bright again, something had changed in the room. The people sitting there were still the same, but the weight they carried felt lighter. Not gone, just shared. The host spoke again, gently. The voice sounded softer now, as if the questions were no longer about a project, but about people. The host asked what happened after those hardest moments, after the nights of doubt, after the meetings filled with silence. One of them answered first. The voice sounded calm, but stronger than before. They said the next day did not bring a miracle. Nothing suddenly became perfect, but one thing changed. They showed up again. They showed up tired. They showed up unsure, but they showed up. Another voice added that small steps saved everything. Not big decisions, just small ones. Fixing one problem at a time, listening more, speaking less, letting ideas breathe instead of forcing them. They talked about learning to slow down, about understanding that rushing only made fear louder. When they slowed down, they could finally hear each other. One person shared how they started asking for help without shame. Before, asking for help felt like weakness. Now it felt like trust. The studio felt warmer as these words filled the air. The host asked about moments of connection, moments that reminded them why they started. The answers came with quiet smiles. There was a late evening when most people had already left. Only a few remained. They were tired, hungry, and close to giving up for the day. But then something worked. A small detail finally clicked. Nothing big, nothing perfect, just enough to feel hope again. They stood there for a moment, not speaking, just breathing. That moment carried them through many hard days later. Another voice shared a memory of laughter, real laughter, not planned, not forced, just a moment where stress lifted for a few minutes. That laughter felt like medicine. The host listened closely. Then came a question that felt personal. How did this journey change the way you see success? The room grew quiet again, but this time the silence felt thoughtful, not heavy. One person said success used to mean winning, being praised, being seen. Now it meant finishing something honestly, even if it was imperfect. Another said success became about growth, about becoming calmer under pressure, kinder under stress, more patient with others and with themselves. Someone else said success was waking up without fear every day, knowing they did their best, even if the result was uncertain. The host nodded. The microphones captured every breath, every pause. The host then asked about the people who supported them quietly, the ones never mentioned publicly. The answers came with emotion. They spoke about families who waited at home, friends who listened without judging, team members who worked without asking for credit. One voice cracked slightly while saying that without those people, nothing would have survived. Not the work, not the spirit. The studio felt full again, but now with gratitude. The host asked if there were moments of regret. The answer was honest, yes. There were things they wished they had done differently, words they wished they had spoken earlier, rest they wished they had taken when the body asked for it, but regret did not control them anymore. It taught them instead. One person said regret becomes heavy only when ignored. When faced honestly, it becomes a guide. The host paused, then asked about fear again, but this time, the fear of the future. What happened after the project moved forward, after attention grew, after eyes turned toward them? One voice explained, that fear never fully left. It only changed shape. Now the fear was about staying grounded, about not losing the lessons learned. Another said attention was loud, but the studio silence stayed with them. It reminded them of where they came from. They said whenever pressure returned, they remembered those quiet days, those doubts, those moments when no one was watching. That memory kept them honest. The host smiled softly. The interview slowly moved toward reflection. The host asked what they would say to someone standing at the beginning of a difficult journey. The answers were simple. One said, "Do not rush your pain. Let it teach you." Another said, "Do not compare your path with others. Everyone walks differently." Someone else said, "Rest when needed, but do not quit during a tired moment." Tired thoughts are not true thoughts. The studio felt calm now, not because everything was easy, but because everything was real. The host asked one final question. If this room could speak, what would it say about you? The room stayed silent for a moment. Then one voice answered. It would say they came in afraid. They stayed honest, and they left changed. Another voice added that the room would say they learned how to listen. The host let those words settle. The red light still glowed. Outside the studio, the world continued. Noise, speed, opinions. But inside, time felt slower. The host thanked them, not as stars or creators, but as people. As the interview came to an end, one person spoke again, without being asked. They said something they had not planned to say. They said that during the hardest days, they forgot why they loved creating. But this journey reminded them, not because of success, but because of connection. Connection with people, with purpose, with self. The microphones captured that truth clearly. The red light slowly turned off. No music played. No dramatic ending, just silence. But it was not empty silence. It was the kind of silence that stays with you after the recording ended. No one rushed to leave. They sat for a few seconds longer. Some removed their headphones slowly. Some stared at the table. The studio felt different now, like it had released something it was holding for a long time. When they finally stood up, their movements were lighter. They did not say much as they left. Words were not needed anymore. The radio studio remained behind, quiet again, but richer. Outside, the night air felt cool. The city lights flickered. Life continued. But for those who had spoken, something had settled inside them. They had faced their fear. They had shared their truth. They had listened and been heard. And for those listening on the other side of the radio, something else happened. They did not just hear an interview. They heard themselves, their own doubts, their own struggles, their own quiet strength. The story did not end in the studio. It continued wherever someone felt alone but kept going, wherever someone chose patience over quitting, wherever someone believed that effort, even unseen, still mattered. The radio waves faded, but the message stayed.